Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's training. My name is Jason Michaels. Today, we're going to talk about something that I call the resilience factor. And the resilience factor, the big question is, do you have the resilience factor? That's the thing that I pose to you, and that I want to tackle this as a question that we basically consider for the next half hour or 40 minutes or so. What's great about this is that the simple answer is yes. Let's actually define what resilience is for a second before we actually find out in what way we have resilience. But resilience, the definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It is a toughness. Some people would define it as a physical toughness. We're going to be talking about it more from a mental toughness point of view here today. And the good news is that yes, you have the resilience factor. Now, why can I say this? How can I say this? Not necessarily having met you, even though you're listening. I can tell you this because we, the human creature, is a most resilient creature. The fact that the entire world throws things at us every single day that are meant to wipe us out, and you are actually watching and listening to this training here today, the fact that you woke up today and you're breathing, the fact that you have survived to this point in time shows that you are in fact resilient. So the question isn't, are you resilient? The question is, how do we increase our resilience? Because yes, you are resilient. I kind of like to think about it from this point of view. So think about a toddler who is learning to walk. A toddler learning to walk has a single-minded focus on standing up and walking, doing this thing, this action that he or she has seen all the adults around them do. This toddler learning how to walk has a single-minded focus. No matter how many times they get knocked down, no matter how many times they lose their balance and fall backwards, no matter how many times they're unable to take that next step, they keep working. They get better balance. They get stronger. And little by little, they go from crawling, sitting, to crawling, to standing, and then finally to walking. That single-minded focus and that example is a perfect example of what resilience is. If that example resonates with you, you know, most people, the vast majority of people who will be listening to or watching this, you understand, you've been there. That is your story. You went from being a toddler who sat on the ground, crawled, and then ultimately began walking. And whether that specifically speaks to you or not, it is the perfect example of the human creature's ability to continue to push forward through no matter how much difficulty that we have. No matter how many times we fail, our ability to continue going towards the goal that we set for ourselves. Now, today's training is really going to be about helping you strengthen your resilience. So the question you might ask yourself is, who is this guy? Why is he talking about resilience? Who is Jason Michaels? Why in the world am I watching and listening to him here today? So I'm going to answer that question in just a second. We're going to answer the question. We're going to talk a little bit about resilience and some of its specific elements. We've already defined resilience, but and we understand that we are resilient, but I'm going to talk to you about some specific things that you can do that include some exercises and some action steps that will strengthen those elements, and that those elements add to your resilience itself. And then toward the end of the training, I'll talk to you a little bit about how you can continue training and continue learning about how to grow your resilience. So who is Jason Michaels? Well, I'll tell you who I'm not. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any sort of advanced training when it comes to this subject. I am a professional entertainer for the last 2 decades. I've been a professional magician and illusionist and sleight of hand artist. And occasionally I'm a little bit funny when I throw that into my shows. I've been standing on stages and entertaining people for about 2 decades. I've been a motivational and keynote speaker as well, and I talk on the subjects of overcoming adversity and on resilience. I wrote an Amazon best-selling book called You Can Do the Impossible Too, and I've entertained and spoken in over 25 countries around the world. But the real thing the real reason that I have a unique perspective and a unique point of view when it comes to resilience is because I grew up with a secret. And my secret was that I had Tourette syndrome. Now, for those of you who don't know what Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder, and it manifests itself as in what doctors refer to as tics. And a tic is usually an uncontrollable, rapid, and repetitive movement or vocalization. And I remember sitting next to my dad on the passenger seat driving across town on my way to school when I was around 6 or 7 years old. And I still remember to this day, even though this is almost 40 years later, I still remember to this day constantly doing this thing right here where I was rubbing my chin against my collarbone, and little by little my neck was starting to get red and irritated. And I didn't know what this was, and I was incredibly frustrated. And when I was 13 years old, at the time, we went and saw doctors, but at the time, Tourette syndrome was not as well known as it is today. It was not as well, the education was not quite as good, and some of the doctors that we spoke to couldn't quite pinpoint exactly what it was. But I was diagnosed when I was 13 years old, and interestingly enough, I found the stage at age 16. And what was interesting about that is when I walked onto the stage, I was interested in, I was in a play, I was interested in acting. And what is interesting is that when I stepped onto the stage, for some strange reason, the twitches, the tics, the vocalizations, the noises, the things that were uncontrollable, the things that people sometimes made fun of me for, those things, when I stepped onto the stage in front of a group of people, for some strange reason, they just disappeared. They vanished almost like a magic trick. And I did, in fact, fall in love with the art of magic not long after that. So it's interesting because sometimes people see me speak, or they see me do a show, or they see me up on stage, and they do not see the twitches and the tics. And I've had people ask me, do you really have Tourette syndrome? Because it doesn't look like you're doing anything. And so I almost find it a little bit comical that I have to kind of prove that I have Tourette syndrome. And so I'm going to show you a video clip. I was on a tour in Europe last year, and we were shooting some commercials from the theater that I was in. We were shooting some commercials to basically promote our show. And after the fact, I asked the video guy to give me the raw footage of the commercial because I knew that I could use a tiny short clip of that to show people what it's like when my tics come out. So I'm going to show you this short, this is not a commercial, this is just a tiny little clip so you can see what the Tourette syndrome tics actually look like.
All right. Yep. All right, Jay. So first of all, just sort of be like, hey, I'm Jason Michaels. You know, I've been doing magic ever since I was a little kid, and you know, that sort of thing. Just sort of give me a little bit, a really short, like, little background. Yeah, you're not looking at the camera, you're looking at me. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Jason Michaels. I started magic when I was 16 years old because I wanted to learn a few card tricks, and now, look at this, it's ridiculous. Here we are with a big magic show, you know, and it literally did start off with something as simple as a magician in a magic shop showing me a magic trick just literally up close and personal, and it made such an impression. I thought, I want to do that. It was the greatest thing ever.
Okay, so there you go. So what is that like? So it's interesting. What I find fascinating about that is that one of the things that I've had some close friends point out to me is that the moment that I lock in on something, it's like, okay, boom, I'm focused. But during that period of time when I'm not focused is when the Tourette's come out. And there was such a stigma as a young person being made fun of and having people make comments about it when I was just out and not wanting to be noticed. You know, it's one thing to stand on stage so that people can see you and want to be seen. It's something else when you're at the grocery store and people are laughing at you and you don't want to be noticed. And so there was such a stigma there that anytime I felt I was in public and people were watching me, it was almost like, even though I tell you that it's uncontrollable, and it was almost like I was able to turn on the stage version of myself, and I was able to be okay until I got home, and then all the Tourette's tics came out. So what specifically does that mean? That means that when you're made fun of as a child, you develop resilience. It means when people laugh at you for having a condition that you have no control over, you develop resilience. It means when you have uncontrollable movements and vocalizations that basically alienate you from everybody else and make you stand out from everybody, and then they sometimes comment or make fun or laugh at you about it, you develop resilience. Or you don't. But what's the difference here? The difference ultimately is the way that I see it is in power. You either develop power and you develop inner strength, resilience, or you allow something to have power over you. So how do you develop power? How do you develop resilience? So the first thing to me, I have a very, I think the word resilient or resilience is a powerful word. I really do. And I think, if you have developed resilience, then you are powerful and you are, you're doing everything necessary. You have an inner strength that maybe people who haven't had to deal with difficulties, maybe those people don't have that resilience. But the problem in my mind with the word resilience is that it infers that you've been a victim of something. So, oh, well, Jason had to develop resilience because he has Tourette syndrome. He is a victim of Tourette syndrome. Or Susie had to develop resilience because she has depression, or whatever it is that you're dealing with. And in today's world with pandemics and economic uncertainty, there are all sorts of different things that are going on in the world. And there are different things that you and I are dealing with that require us to develop resilience around. We have to develop resilience in order to better deal with the uncertainties and the difficulties of life. So to me, the number one thing I like to do is I like to take the power away from whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever you personally feel like is weighing on you, whatever is just like your burden to bear. My first thing to say to you would be, let's take away the power from that so that we don't view ourselves as a victim, but we reframe it and we relabel it so that instead of seeing ourselves as a victim, we are able to actually see ourselves as someone who is victorious over what we're dealing with. So I don't like the idea of being a victim. And so we're going to get rid of that mindset completely. We're going to shift. So you see, I didn't let Tourette syndrome define me, and I don't want whatever you're dealing with to define you. So if you have depression, if you're literally dealing with sadness, if you're dealing with frustration, or all the myriad things that you could possibly be dealing with, the first thing we want to do is we don't want to let those things define us. First things first, just because I have Tourette syndrome does not mean that I am Tourette syndrome. My name isn't Tourette syndrome. And I remember feeling this way at a very young age, where it's like, just because I have this doesn't mean it is me. My name is Jason. It's not Tourette syndrome. There are a lot of things that make up Jason, and Tourette syndrome is just one small element. It isn't all of me. So my question to you is this: if you were to make up a list, if you made up a list of, let's say, here's a challenge for you. If you took an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper, and I said to you, I'd like you to write down all the different elements that you think make up you, whether it's your life experiences, your interests, the things you've researched and learned about, your relationships. If you were to write down every little trait that you can think of, even a trait that has just the tiniest, that just a tiny little bit of you, up to the big things that really you feel make up who you are. If you wrote all of those things down and made a list, if you spent an hour writing down, really genuinely thinking about it, like actually taking the time to write down everything that you thought to yourself, every little element that makes you you. What is on that list? For me, Tourette syndrome is just one little tiny element out of, I don't even know how many. I bet you that if you wrote that down and you started writing on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you could fill that up with well over 100 different traits, well over 100 different things that make you who you are. And that sadness or that whatever it is that you're dealing with that you feel that feels maybe overwhelming is just one tiny element. Think about that. One tiny element out of all the things that make you who you are. That alone should be rather eye-opening. That alone, sometimes we get so lost in the moment and what we're dealing with in the moment, it feels as though it is the only thing that is enveloping our entire world that we forget everything else. So for the next few minutes, I want to specifically talk about 4 different ways to develop resilience and power so that no more victimhood, but you coming from a powerful stance. So let's talk about these. Number 1, the first thing that I want to offer you is the idea of owning it. Whatever it is that you're dealing with, give it a name. To give something a name gives you power. You see, I didn't know when I was 7 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, and I was having these movements and I was twitching and my chin was rubbing against my collarbone and my neck was getting raw. And I was doing these things that I didn't know why I was doing them, that were uncontrollable. And they just kept happening. It was incredibly frustrating. And I didn't know what it was. But when I was 13 years old, I saw a pediatric neurologist, and that pediatric neurologist diagnosed me with something that I found out was called Tourette syndrome. And it was this moment of relief when I said, okay, it's Tourette syndrome. This is what it is. The reason that I do these things is something called Tourette syndrome. The reason that sometimes I make a strange clicking noise is Tourette syndrome. Now that we know what it is, I can look for treatments for it. Now that I know what it is, it's not some unknown entity that has some sort of power over me. You see, when you're honest with yourself and when you acknowledge that you are dealing with something difficult, something that might feel overwhelming, that is a genuine act of bravery. It really is. I come to you from a place where I assure you I have had to learn how to be brave in my life. And if you are willing to own to yourself, just to yourself, so that you say, you know what I'm dealing with, and then name it. Owning that is the first step towards gaining power over it. So I have a little exercise for you. I have a little challenge. Whatever this thing is, whatever this challenge, whatever this overwhelming, or maybe it's not overwhelming, maybe it's just something that you're just dealing with right this moment. Maybe it's just something that's a difficulty and it's a frustration and you want to learn how to better handle it. Name it. Say it out loud. Take that piece of paper that I was talking about earlier. Maybe you make that list that we were talking about a few minutes ago. And if you have a hard time naming it, write down the elements that make it up. And then maybe it will become more and more clear what you're dealing with. And if you can't give it an actual technical name and say, oh, it appears I'm dealing with this, give it a name that makes sense to you. Just a name that makes sense to you so that you can say this, and you use whatever word makes sense to you. This is what I'm dealing with. Because the moment you own it, the moment you give it a name, you exercise power over it. So what comes next? After you own something, after you give it a name, what happens next? The next step of taking power over something is to talk about it. Now, this is the part that was so difficult for me. I was literally embarrassed about having Tourette syndrome until I was in my 30s. Now, I'm in my 40s now, and that means that for 30 something years, that means for 3/4 of my life, I was so embarrassed by having Tourette syndrome that I wouldn't talk about it. So I have a friend who is also a professional magician, and he is also a motivational speaker. And he's the one who actually inspired me to start speaking. And he knew my story. He was one of the few people who kind of knew my story and knew that I had Tourette syndrome, and because he had just seen it, and he actually was just forward enough to kind of ask me about it. And when people asked me about it in a kind way, I was willing to talk about it. I just didn't want to bring it up. I had a hard time being the person that was willing to say, hey, I have Tourette syndrome. So he learned about what it was that I had, and he asked me questions about it so that he could educate himself about it. And little by little, he realized that even though his and my story, life stories are quite a bit different, they had a lot of similarities. And he started saying to me, you know, Jason, you really should be out speaking about this. You should be out talking to people about this. And I was dead set against it. In fact, I told him on more than one occasion, I'm not going to do that. Don't bring it up again. Because the level of embarrassment that I had about not being able to control these movements at the time, not now, at the time, it genuinely felt like it was my big weakness. Like out of all the things in life, out of all the things I could control in my life, I couldn't control this thing. And so I felt like when it came to this thing, this Tourette syndrome that I dealt with, it made me feel like I was like a failure, which doesn't even make sense. When you stop and think about it, it doesn't make sense at all, but that's the way it felt. So my friend is a persistent guy. And what he did little by little over the course of more than a year, multiple years, he started just planting little seeds about being willing to talk about it to other people. And he showed by his own example how he was using his life story about dealing with difficulties and overwhelming obstacles, how he was using his life story to go out and affect other people's lives and to touch their lives. And one day I was at one of his talks, and I saw a group of teenagers come up afterwards and speak to him. And it was obvious that he had touched them in a way emotionally that no magic trick had ever connected with people before that I'd ever seen. He had found a way to touch base in a very real, honest way with them that they were inspired by. And that is the moment that I realized how important it was to talk about having Tourette syndrome. And that is also why I'm asking you to be willing to talk about it as well. Now, I'm not saying to you, oh, you need to go stand up in front of a large group of people and talk about your difficulties. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm a professional performer. I get up in front of groups. That's what I do. That's my job. It's my career. It's my passion. And ultimately, that was the right choice for me. And perhaps it is the right choice for you, but that's not specifically what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is to be willing to find somebody that you can trust, someone who has your best interest at heart that you can talk to about this frustration, about this difficulty, about whatever it is that you're dealing with that is overwhelming or embarrassing or whatever the situation is to you. You see, the moment I started talking about it is the moment that I realized that the stigma had changed in my own head. And instead of feeling embarrassed, I was now owning it. So instead of Tourette syndrome owning me, which is what it felt like, now I was owning the Tourette syndrome because I was able to share with other people about how I dealt with it, and it was helping them as well. And so by sharing with other people, you connect with other people. And if it's somebody that can nourish you, if it is somebody that you can trust, then it gives you the power over whatever it is that you're dealing with. And it also makes a deeper connection with that person. I also realized when I started talking about it that I wasn't the only person dealing with challenges. See, I was never alone. It felt like I was alone, but I was never alone. I could share my experiences with other people. I could help other people deal with the difficulties that they were dealing with as well. If they were willing to listen to me, I was willing to listen to them, and I could help empower them, which is kind of what we're doing here today. I'm sharing this with you, and this is, to be honest with you, this is something that if you had asked me if I would do this and speak to an entire group of people and tell very personal experiences from my life, if you had told me that I'll do this maybe 10, 12 years ago, I would have said, oh, no, no way. Just like I said to my friend, no, I'm not willing to do that. So number one, number two, I say, let's share it. Share it with somebody else who's willing to listen to you, because bottling it up feels unbearable. It really does. But talking about it is empowering. It gives you a release. It lets this thing, it's like releasing steam. All of it comes out, the tension dissipates, the stigma dissipates. So my question to you now is, you have somebody that you trust, that is going to be able to listen to you, that you can talk to. Is that something that you are able to do? Because it is an act of bravery, but it is a powerful next step. So number one, give it a name, own it. Number two, let's talk to somebody about it. Whether it's one person, or maybe you go talk to a group of people, and there are people who are there to support you while you share your experience dealing with what you're dealing with. Number three, let's talk about looking at the big picture. The big picture, not getting lost in the tiny details. You know, there's a famous saying, and at this point in life, it's cliche, where they say, don't miss the forest because of the trees. In other words, don't get lost in the minutia, the details, the thing that is right in front of you, and miss that there is a big picture in front of you. You're standing in a giant forest. Think about that. If you, which I will encourage you to do this. If you will take that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and you will write down those list of traits, the different things that you feel make you up. And then you look at all of those different traits, that's much more of a big picture. While Tourette syndrome, or depression, or sadness, or economic uncertainty, or a pandemic, those are just one element. We're back to that. Being able to see the big picture. I got fascinated by sleight of hand magic when I was in high school, about the same time that I decided to go out for the school play that I told you about and got a role in. And I remember that I walked into a magic shop one day, and the man blew my mind. The stuff that he was doing, the things that he was doing right in front of me, just blew my mind. And I immediately wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to share this experience of amazement with somebody else. And so I started buying some of the things that you buy when you're a magician. And then I went in another time, and I remember seeing several magicians off in the corner. These were established magicians, people who had been doing magic for a long time. And I remember him standing next to the guy who owned the shop, and these guys were doing card tricks for each other. And the guy who owned the shop looked at me and he said, "Hey, do you see what they're doing over there? What that guy just did, that card trick that he did, is called sleight of hand." And sleight of hand is very, very difficult. Some people spend their entire lives working on sleight of hand. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, spend their entire lives working on sleight of hand. It's very, very difficult. Well, I guess there's no way that I would be able to do that. So what happened was at some time later, I was doing magic at a friend's house for just a small group of people. And after I finished my little impromptu show, the guy's dad walks up to me and he says, "Hey, that thing that you did, that trick that you did with the deck of cards, were you using," boom, and then he named the exact device that I had purchased at the magic shop, and he named it, and he made it very clear that he knew what I was doing. And it killed the experience for me, because when I saw magic the first time, I just wanted to share this experience of amazement with people. It was the feeling of wonder that just absolutely just set me on fire, and I wanted other people to have that experience too. And when he saw and was able to identify what I did, I realized that he didn't have that experience, and it just killed the entire experience for me. I went back to that magic shop because I knew there was something that I had to do. I knew that if there were items that people could buy from behind the counter at a magic shop and anybody could just walk in and buy them, I knew that other people, that situation might happen again. And so I went back and I started looking for ways to learn sleight of hand. And little by little, you see, that experience opened up the idea in my mind. Now, here's why I tell you this story. Because the man wasn't wrong. People do spend their entire lives working on sleight of hand, but it's not because it takes that long to learn sleight of hand. It's because they enjoy the sleight of hand that much. And he was also right, sleight of hand is difficult, but there's a beginning level sleight of hand, there's an intermediate level sleight of hand, and there's expert level sleight of hand. And the beginning level sleight of hand is not that hard. It's the beginning level. It's specifically designed for people to learn as beginners and progress over time. You see, I had in my head that it would be too difficult for me to learn. So what did that mean? That means that I was missing the forest because I was stuck in the trees. I was so worried, and I had this idea that I would never be able to learn this thing because it was so hard that I wasn't willing to see that I had an entire lifetime. Once I mastered one little bit of sleight of hand, I could now use that sleight of hand for the rest of my life. If you consider that the average lifespan of an American is right around 80 years, give or take, whether you're a man or a woman, if you consider that your lifespan is 80 years, even if something takes a year or 2 or 3 years to master, or 5 years to master, think of how many more years you have to master that. So if you're dealing with something and you're saying, I just can't handle this, but you look at it as far as this is happening, it's a season in life. It's not a lifetime. This is a small season. Seasons in life are summer, spring, winter, fall. There are seasons in life where there is lack. There are seasons in life where there's illness. There are seasons in life where there is abundance. A season in life is just a short period of time, while a lifetime is all of those seasons put together. So if you're dealing with something that feels difficult, please take a look at the big picture. Look at the entire span of your life. So the exercise here would be to write down a past season of life that was difficult for you, and that now you've gone past it. You've overcome it. You've moved beyond it. What does that look like? What does that season that you conquered, that you overcame, what was it? And how did it feel at the time? Because I'm willing to bet you it probably felt overwhelming. It probably felt like a massive obstacle. But if you take a look at that big picture and you see the real perspective of things, that is a wonderful way to look at the difficulties that we deal with in life. Let's take a look at number 4. This is the last thing that I'm going to share with you here today. Number 4 is programming yourself. Number 1 is own it, give it a name. Let's see here. Number 2 is, let's say I have to go. Number 2 is be willing to talk about it. Number 3 is look at the big picture. And number 4, program yourself. The things that you take in ultimately influence the things that come out of you. One of my favorite quotes, just one of my favorite quotes, is one of Zig Ziglar's quotes, and he says, people often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing, and that's why we recommend it daily. So what are you programming yourself with? You know, think about it. I'd be willing to bet you that if you watch the news on a consistent basis and that's the thing that you take a lot in, I'm going to be willing to bet you probably are dealing with a lot of fear. Now, I'm not here to tell you to be uninformed. What I am here to say to you is that are the things that you are allowing in your mind, are they nourishing you in your life? Think about it. Stop and think about it just for a second. Are the things that you are allowing to permeate your eyes, go into your ears, even the things that you eat, are they coming into your body, and are they helping you every day that you live? What should you be programming yourself with? You see, in my mind, you can go from victim to victor by programming your mind with the right things. And those right things are going to be different for everybody. For me, I love magic. I love being up in front of groups of people. I love to study things that I'm not good at. I have a blast studying comedy because I'm really not naturally funny, and it's this massive challenge. And I get a lot of pleasure out of studying these things and allowing me to figure out how to get better at them. But what I don't do is I've identified certain things that do not add positivity to my life. So the question is, what are you programming yourself with? You can program yourself by the things that you watch on television and the things that you listen to on the radio and the people that you are with. You can also program yourself on a very active basis by you programming literally yourself. And the exercise here that I would recommend that you do would be to make verbal declarations, literally make a list. Make a list of the things that you would like to see happen in your life. Make a list of the ways that you want to deal with what you're dealing with. So instead of allowing something else to have power over you, let's literally make a list. I have lists after lists. I have all these lists here about, says, who are you and what have you done? I wrote this one day because I wanted to remind myself of the things I've accomplished in life, because, hey, I have difficult days too. This says mission statements. What are the things you want and why? I have all these different lists of the ways that I'm programming myself. And you know what I do? I write them out, who I want to be, who I want to become, and then I look at them and I read them on a daily basis. I make verbal declarations of who I am and who I'm becoming. Another exercise would be to create a vision board of the things that visually represent who you want to be. Who are you? And who do you want to be? And then to review those daily. If you have a vision board, which is a very powerful tool to be able to look at the things that you want to have in your life, the things that you want to attract in your life, the things that you want to work toward, having that vision board that you can look at right in front of you. So you can say, that's what I'm going toward. That's the person I'm going to be. If you saw some of my vision boards, I have things as far as personal goals from a physical standpoint, exercise and whatnot. I have things that represent professional goals as far as the types of stages that I want to be on. Creating a vision board is a very, very powerful technique for moving yourself closer and closer to what you want to achieve in life. So I say program yourself with the right things, and that will get you closer and that will help you develop power and resilience together. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. That is today's training, those 4 elements. There will be another training. I know you thought that this might be the only one. In our next training that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be discussing more elements of resilience. I am going to be discussing compassion. I'm going to be discussing mindfulness. I'm going to be discussing gratitude and how we can exercise our ability to love ourselves. I do hope that you will join me. And I do thank you for participating in today's resilience training. Now, let me tell you how you can access the next training. Now, first and foremost, again, I've already thanked you. I want to thank you one more time. I really, truly appreciate you being a part of this today's training, and I hope you got something out of it. I hope that you take what I shared with you today and you apply it to your life.